It's strange how you can live through years of your life thinking everything is exactly how it should be, until one day, a single moment cracks through that illusion, and suddenly, you start seeing all the things you ignored before. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there. They were just quiet, subtle, hidden beneath layers of comfort and routine. My name's Ethan Walker, and for most of my 30s, I was married to a woman named Lauren. We met in 2011, back when I was 26 and still figuring out who the hell I was supposed to be. I was working as a marketing coordinator for a small ad agency in Cincinnati, the kind of job that barely paid the bills but gave me just enough to dream. She was a freelance photographer, ambitious, confident, one of those people who made you feel like you were standing in the presence of someone who had their life together. The night I met her, she was taking photos at a charity event I'd helped organize. I remember she wore this emerald green dress, the kind that caught the light in a way that made everyone else fade into the background. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. When she looked at you, she made you feel like you were the only person in the room worth her time. That was intoxicating. We started dating soon after, and before long, she became the center of my world. I wasn't naive to her charm. She had plenty of admirers, and she liked it that way. But I told myself that was just who she was, confident, social, independent. She made me feel lucky, like I'd won something I didn't even deserve. We got married in 2014, in a small church on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a huge wedding, just close friends and family, but it felt like a big deal to me. I remember standing at the altar, looking at her through that veil, thinking, this is it. This is what happiness looks like. But life has a funny way of twisting that word around until it doesn't mean what you thought it did. Our early years together were good. We moved into a modest townhouse downtown, shared lazy Sundays, traveled when we could afford it, and talked about kids someday. But even then, there were cracks forming beneath the surface. Lauren had a restless energy that never quite went away. She wanted more excitement, more recognition, more success. Meanwhile, I was the kind of guy who found peace in stability. I liked coming home, cooking dinner, watching Netflix, and falling asleep with her beside me. She used to call me boring. Not in a cruel way, at least not at first, but like it was some inside joke. She'd laugh about how I didn't like parties, how I didn't take risks, how I wasn't spontaneous enough. And I'd laugh along, pretending it didn't sting, because I wanted her to think I was easygoing. But words have weight, even the ones wrapped in laughter. By 2017, our marriage started to feel uneven. I was putting in long hours at work, trying to move up to a senior position. She'd started getting more photography gigs, weddings, corporate events, even a few magazine shoots. She'd often come home late, buzzing from the adrenaline of creative work, while I'd already be half asleep on the couch. We were living parallel lives that occasionally touched but never really connected. Then came the arguments. Small at first, about chores, money, her late nights, but over time, they got sharper. She accused me of not supporting her dreams enough, of being too practical, too scared to take risks. I'd counter that she was never satisfied, that she was chasing something that didn't exist. There was one night in particular, I think it was February 2018, that still echoes in my head sometimes. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch after another argument about something stupid, probably her spending too much on new camera gear. I remember her looking at me with this tired expression, like she'd already made up her mind about something. She said, "You'll never find better than me, Ethan." And it wasn't said with arrogance, it was said with certainty. Like she genuinely believed it. Like she thought she was doing me a favor by staying. At that moment, I didn't respond. I just sat there, staring at her, feeling something inside me quietly collapse. I didn't know it then, but that sentence would become the line that defined the rest of our story. Still, I stayed. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You hold on, even when it hurts, hoping things will get better. We tried therapy once. It didn't stick. Lauren said it was too structured, and that the therapist didn't get her. I tried to suggest we keep going, but she brushed it off, saying we'd figure things out ourselves. Except we never really did. By 2020, things had shifted again. The pandemic hit, and suddenly we were stuck at home together all the time. I thought maybe that would bring us closer, force us to slow down and reconnect. But it did the opposite. She became distant, emotionally, physically, in every way that mattered. I'd wake up to find her already on her laptop editing photos, and I'd go to bed alone while she stayed up watching YouTube tutorials or scrolling through Instagram. I could tell she was comparing her life to other photographers, those picture-perfect influencers with expensive studios, sponsorships, and endless travel photos. I think she started resenting me for not being the kind of man who could give her that. There were times I'd catch her texting late at night, her face lit by that cold blue light of her phone screen. When I asked, she'd say it was a client. I believed her, because I wanted to. Around August 2020, I got promoted at work. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was something I was proud of. I remember buying a bottle of champagne to celebrate. She congratulated me with a quick hug and then said, "That's great, babe. Maybe now we can finally afford to travel somewhere nice." It wasn't the response I hoped for. I wanted her to say she was proud of me, that she saw how hard I'd been working. But instead, it felt like another reminder that whatever I achieved, it was never enough. Still, I kept pushing through. That's what I did best, showing up, doing the work, staying steady. But she started to drift even further away. By the end of that year, I could feel the silence between us growing louder. Meals became wordless. Laughter felt forced. Even when we touched, it was mechanical, like two people fulfilling a routine rather than expressing love. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we got there. How the woman I once couldn't wait to wake up next to had become someone I barely recognized. Sometimes, I'd think about leaving. I'd imagine packing a bag, getting in the car, and driving until the city lights faded behind me. But then I'd see the wedding photos on the shelf, the ones where we looked so happy, and I'd convince myself that maybe it was just a phase. That love was supposed to survive this kind of storm. Then came the final straw, or at least the first real one. It was March 2021, a cold Thursday morning. I remember because I'd spilled coffee on my tie before work and was already in a rush. Lauren had been acting strange all week, distant, distracted. She'd told me she had a photo shoot across town and would be home late. That night, I decided to surprise her with takeout from her favorite Thai place. I drove to the address she'd mentioned, the studio she said she'd rented for the shoot. When I got there, it was dark. No cars outside. No lights on. I tried calling her. No answer. I waited a few minutes, then drove home. She didn't come back until past midnight. Said she was exhausted. I didn't question it, but something in her tone felt rehearsed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, the secrecy, the distance, the lies I'd been too afraid to see. And deep down, I already knew. I didn't have proof yet, but I could feel it in my gut, the same way you can feel a storm before it breaks. Something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, the tension became unbearable. She'd get irritated when I asked simple questions, guarded when I walked into the room. I started noticing little details, her perfume lingering when she'd go out for errands, her new obsession with makeup before leaving the house, the way she smiled at her phone sometimes, a small, secret smile that wasn't meant for me. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That paranoia would only make things worse. But when trust starts to crack, every small thing feels like evidence. I became a detective in my own home, watching, noticing, collecting moments that didn't add up. And though I tried to ignore it, that sentence from years ago, "You'll never find better than me," kept echoing in my mind. It wasn't confidence. It was a warning. If I'd been wiser, maybe I would have faced it sooner. Maybe I would have asked the hard questions before the truth found me first. But I didn't. And that mistake would cost me more than I ever imagined. If I had to pinpoint the exact moment when everything shattered, it would be that humid night in April 2021. It's strange how you never know a memory is about to carve itself permanently into your chest until it's already too late. That evening started out like any other. Lauren said she was going to shoot engagement photos for a couple at a lakeside park about 30 minutes away. She left around 4 p.m., kissed me on the cheek like it meant something, and drove off in her silver Subaru. I remember watching her tail lights disappear at the end of our street, thinking how beautiful she still looked when she was excited about work. But something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way she'd been distant lately, maybe the way she didn't meet my eyes when she said goodbye. I tried to shake it off, but that gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. I went through the motions of the evening, fed the dog, cleaned the dishes, scrolled through emails, but my mind kept drifting. I found myself checking her location on Find My iPhone, something I'd never done before. I told myself it was out of concern, but deep down, I knew I was looking for confirmation of a truth I already feared. The dot on the screen showed she wasn't at the park. She was downtown. I refreshed the map over and over, thinking maybe it was a glitch. But no, it stayed fixed on an apartment complex near Eden Park, a part of the city she had no reason to be in. My heart started to race, and I felt that cold rush of adrenaline that comes when denial starts losing its grip. I called her once. No answer. Twice. Still nothing. By the third time, I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove. The air outside was thick and sticky, and the sun was already setting, painting the sky with that orange-pink glow that usually made me feel calm. But not that night. That night, it felt mocking. When I reached the apartment complex, I parked across the street and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what I was expecting to see. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't go home pretending everything was fine. And then I saw it. Her car. Parked in the lot. There was no wedding shoot. No clients. Just her, here. I sat there for what felt like hours, the air in the car growing heavy with every breath. I watched the building, my stomach twisting with each passing minute. Around 9, the front door opened, and she walked out. She wasn't alone. A man followed her out, a tall guy with broad shoulders, probably mid-30s. He was laughing about something, and she turned to him, smiling in that way I hadn't seen her smile at me in months. And then she kissed him. It wasn't a quick, careless kiss. It was slow, familiar, like something they'd done before. Like something that had meaning. I remember my entire body going numb. It was like my mind couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. I just sat there, frozen, while the world around me kept moving. Cars passing, streetlights flickering, crickets humming. When they pulled apart, he brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she laughed. I don't know why that small gesture broke me more than the kiss itself, but it did. It was intimate. Personal. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream or storm out of the car like in some movie. I just sat there, watching, feeling my chest cave in. When she finally drove off, I followed her from a distance. She didn't go home. She went to a nearby diner, probably to make it look like she'd been working late. She stayed there about half an hour, then finally came back to the house. I waited another 10 minutes before walking in. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, still wearing the same clothes, acting like nothing had happened. She looked up when she heard me and smiled faintly, asking if I'd eaten. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. She didn't feel guilty. Not even a trace of it. I wanted to tell her I'd seen everything, that I knew. But the words wouldn't come. My mouth went dry, my throat locked up. I just nodded, said I wasn't hungry, and went upstairs. That night, I lay in bed beside her, wide awake, while she slept peacefully next to me. Every breath she took felt like another betrayal. The next morning, she acted normal again. Coffee, makeup, casual chatter about errands. I watched her the way you watch a stranger who's wearing someone you love's face. Over the next few days, I spiraled. I couldn't focus at work. My appetite disappeared. I'd catch myself zoning out in meetings, replaying that moment in the parking lot over and over like some twisted film reel. I told no one. I wasn't ready for the embarrassment. I kept thinking maybe there was some explanation. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But every time I tried to rationalize it, my mind would flash back to the way she smiled at him. That smile killed every ounce of denial I had left. By May, things between us were unbearable. She grew colder, more distant. I started sleeping in the guest room, telling her it was because of my late work hours. She didn't question it. Maybe she didn't care. Then one night, I finally broke. I don't even know what triggered it. Maybe it was seeing her come home late again. Maybe it was catching that same perfume scent that wasn't meant for me. Whatever it was, I snapped. I asked her directly if she was seeing someone else. She didn't deny it. She didn't confess, either. She just stared at me, silent, with this defiant look that said everything her mouth didn't. That silence was all the confirmation I needed. We didn't speak for 3 days after that. The air in the house felt toxic, like every corner was soaked with tension. When she finally did talk to me again, it wasn't to apologize. It was to blame me. She said I'd checked out years ago. That I didn't make her feel alive anymore. That she'd been lonely, and she just wanted to feel something. I remember standing there, listening, feeling my hands tremble. She said I was too safe, too predictable, too small for her world. And then, she said it again. You'll never find better than me, Ethan. This time, it wasn't a statement, it was a weapon. She looked at me like I was a failure of a man. Like she'd already rewritten our history in her head to make herself the victim. The next day, she packed a few bags and left. She said she needed space. I didn't stop her. I just watched from the porch as she drove away, her taillights fading into the same direction they had that April night. And just like that, 10 years of my life vanished in a matter of minutes. In the days that followed, I went through the stages of grief in no particular order. Anger, sadness, disbelief, numbness. My house became a mausoleum of what used to be. Every room echoed with ghosts. Her coffee mug still sat in the sink, her shoes by the door, her scent lingering on the pillow beside me. I tried distracting myself with work, but even there, I was falling apart. My boss called me into his office once, asking if everything was okay. I lied, said I was fine. Nights were the worst. There's something about silence after betrayal that hits differently. It's not peaceful, it's suffocating. I'd find myself scrolling through old photos, trying to figure out where things went wrong. By June, I found out through mutual friends that she'd moved in with the same guy I'd seen that night. His name was Tyler, a freelance videographer she'd worked with before. The irony was unbearable. She'd found someone who shared her creative lifestyle, the adventurous partner she always said she wanted. For weeks, I told myself I was over it. That I didn't care. But that was a lie. The truth was, I felt humiliated. Like I'd been discarded, replaced, made into a cautionary tale. There was one night, I think it was early July, when I sat on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by boxes of her things I hadn't yet thrown out. I picked up one of her old photo albums, flipped through the pages, and stopped at a picture from our honeymoon in Maine. We were standing on the pier in Bar Harbor, laughing about something, her hair whipping in the wind. She looked so happy. And I remember thinking, was that moment real? Or was it just another snapshot of something that only existed in my head? That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not out of love for her, but out of grief for the version of myself I'd lost trying to keep her. A few weeks later, she came by to collect the rest of her things. She didn't say much, just walked around the house like a stranger, boxing up pieces of a life she no longer wanted. Before she left, she paused at the door, looked around, and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." I didn't respond. I couldn't. When the door closed behind her, it felt like the sound of finality. Like an entire chapter of my life had slammed shut. The days after that were a blur. I deleted her number, unfollowed her on social media, blocked her everywhere I could. I thought cutting her out completely would make it easier. But healing isn't a clean process. It's messy, unpredictable, and full of backslides. There were mornings I'd wake up reaching for her before remembering she wasn't there. There were nights I'd almost text her just to ask how she was, before catching myself mid-sentence. But slowly, something began to shift. The pain didn't fade, it just started to feel different. Less sharp. More like a scar than an open wound. I began going on long walks after work, listening to music, trying to clear my head. Sometimes I'd stop by a small cafe downtown, the kind of place I'd never gone to before because Lauren didn't like crowded, basic spots. There, I'd sit for hours, sipping coffee, people watching, just existing. And one afternoon, as I sat there watching the world move around me, a thought crossed my mind that I hadn't allowed before. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would never find someone better. But what if the person I needed to find was me? That was the first time I started to feel something resembling peace. It would be a long road before I truly got there, but that thought was the seed. And from that seed, everything that came next began to grow. The days and weeks after Lauren left were like wandering through a fog. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was an unrelenting sense of displacement, like my life had been lifted from its moorings and set adrift. Every corner of our townhouse reminded me of her. The coffee mugs, the framed photos, the little notes she'd left in my laptop bag or on the fridge. Everything was a testament to the life we'd built, and now it was all proof of what had been taken from me. Work offered little refuge. The ad agency had been my escape before, a place where I could throw myself into projects and deadlines to quiet my own mind. But now, every email felt like a reminder that the world kept moving while mine had stalled. My productivity plummeted. Meetings blurred together. I'd catch myself staring out the window for minutes at a time, imagining her laughing somewhere, her hand in Tyler's, and the pit in my stomach would tighten like a vice. Friends tried to reach out. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear their well-meaning advice, their "you'll get through this" pep talks. It felt patronizing, even if they didn't intend it that way. I wanted to scream that I didn't need to get through it. I needed her gone from my life entirely. I wanted her absence to mean something more than just pain. The loneliness was suffocating. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake in the guest room, listening to the hum of the city outside, wishing for the kind of sleep that makes you forget the world for a few hours. But my mind refused. Every thought circled back to her, the way she'd smiled at me when she first walked into my life, the way she'd said, "You'll never find better than me," and the slow, deliberate betrayal that had followed. I started drinking more than I should have. Nothing excessive, just enough wine or whiskey to numb the edges of the hurt. I'd pour a glass, sit by the window, and watch the streetlights blur in the dark, thinking about what I'd lost. I told myself it was temporary, just a coping mechanism. But it became a ritual, a nightly reminder that I was broken in ways I didn't yet understand. Family offered support, though even there, the dynamics were complicated. My parents, retired and living in Columbus, were sympathetic but cautious. They'd always liked Lauren. They'd thought she was ambitious, creative, the kind of woman who'd elevate me. When they learned she'd left, they called, worried about me, but also subtly trying to shield themselves from blame or gossip. My father, in particular, had a way of talking that made me feel both comforted and misunderstood. He'd say things like, "Ethan, sometimes people leave because it's not about you. It's about them finding their own path." And while I nodded on the phone, inside I was boiling. No. It's about her betraying me. It's about her choosing someone else over the years we built. Even my younger sister, Madeline, who lived in Chicago, tried to console me through long texts and FaceTime calls. But there's only so much anyone can do when the person they're trying to reach is too deep in the spiral to respond. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want advice. I wanted answers that she'd never give me. Around the same time, I noticed a shift in my own behavior. I was angry in ways I hadn't anticipated. Small things set me off: the sound of her favorite song on the radio, a couple laughing in the park, an Instagram story of a happy couple I didn't know. Each reminder of what I'd lost felt like salt on an open wound. I tried therapy. I'd put it off before because I thought I could handle things on my own, but now I realized I couldn't. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Patel, didn't offer easy fixes. She asked hard questions. What do you need from yourself? What patterns have you allowed to continue? How are you complicit in your own suffering? At first, I hated her for asking these questions. I wanted someone to validate my pain, not challenge it. But slowly, her words started to seep in. I realized that part of my agony wasn't just her leaving. It was the years I'd spent prioritizing her happiness over my own. The years I'd ignored my own instincts, doubts, and needs because I believed that love meant sacrifice without question. One day in late July, I was walking through the neighborhood near Eden Park, the same area where I'd caught her with Tyler. The sunlight was golden, filtering through the trees in a way that reminded me of early summer mornings we'd spent together before the marriage started unraveling. I found myself staring at the same apartment complex, my chest tightening at the memory. And then, for the first time, I realized I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. The clarity didn't come suddenly, it was gradual. I began taking back the parts of my life I'd lost. I rearranged the townhouse, packing away things that reminded me of her. I sold off her furniture and decorations. I deleted her photos from my phone, erased her from my playlists, and blocked her social media accounts. Each action was a small reclaiming of autonomy, a symbolic gesture that this life was mine again, even if it didn't feel like it yet. Work became a different kind of refuge. I threw myself into new projects with a focus I hadn't had before. Promotions came, opportunities arose, and colleagues started noticing the renewed drive. I was still hurting, but I was channeling it. Pain, I realized, could be converted into something constructive if you were willing to sit with it long enough. I also started reconnecting with old friends I'd neglected during the marriage. People I'd drifted away from because Lauren hadn't liked them, or because our life together had become an insular bubble. We went to concerts, local festivals, even late-night karaoke sessions, things that felt indulgent at first, but eventually became a source of joy. And then came a turning point, a moment that was small but seismic in retrospect. One evening in August, I went to a local bookstore to kill time. I wandered into the philosophy section, a habit I'd picked up during college but had abandoned for years. I picked up a book on Stoicism, titles by Ryan Holiday and Marcus Aurelius, and started reading in a corner of the shop. There, amid the smell of old pages and coffee from the cafe next door, I read something that stuck. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. I read that line over and over, thinking about the betrayal, the anger, the helplessness. And for the first time, I believed it. Not that what had happened was fair. Not that the pain would vanish overnight. But I could control how I responded. It didn't happen all at once. Some days were worse than others. I'd still wake up in the middle of the night, heart hammering, imagining them together. I'd still get the urge to check her social media, only to slam the laptop shut in frustration. But the frequency of those moments began to lessen. I also started journaling, something I'd never done seriously before. At first, it was a raw venting, a stream of consciousness filled with grief, anger, and disbelief. But over time, it transformed. I wrote about who I was, who I wanted to be, the kind of relationships I deserved, and the mistakes I'd made along the way. I began to see patterns in my life, the ways I'd compromised myself to maintain a sense of stability or to keep someone else happy. By September 2021, I noticed a subtle but profound change. I started laughing more, genuine laughter, not the forced smiles I used to give in her presence. By the time 2022 rolled around, I had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. The raw, numbing grief had evolved into a quiet determination. I'd learned that the only way to survive a betrayal like Lauren's was not to seek revenge in the traditional sense, not to humiliate or expose her, but to focus on transforming myself. To become someone she couldn't touch, someone unshakably strong. I started small. I cleaned the townhouse obsessively, redecorating in a way that felt fully mine. Every corner, every shelf, every color choice reflected the person I wanted to be, not the person she wanted me to be. I sold the furniture she'd left behind and bought pieces that made me feel grounded, solid, reliable, yet beautiful. I added a few plants to the living room, not because they were trendy, but because caring for them reminded me I could nurture life and beauty in my own world, without her input or approval. Work became a battlefield, though not the kind I had expected. I threw myself into every project, every client pitch, and every presentation with an intensity one hadn't known I possessed. The pain of the past year was no longer a weight, it was fuel. When colleagues noticed the change, I didn't need to explain it. My success spoke for itself. I got promoted again in March 2022, and this time, I had the confidence to demand recognition and a raise that reflected my contributions. But the real change was internal. I started focusing on my physical health, running early in the morning, hitting the gym, and making food choices that nourished me instead of numbing me. I even joined a local cycling club. The first few rides were brutal. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The pain of exertion was therapeutic. It reminded me that I could endure hardship and still come out stronger on the other side. Socially, I began reclaiming my life as well. I reached out to old friends I'd drifted from, people Lauren had never liked or approved of. I started attending meetups and local events, not for anyone's approval, but because I genuinely wanted to be part of a community again. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was enjoying their company more than I had enjoyed being with Lauren in the last few years of our marriage. There was laughter, honesty, and a lack of pretense, things that had been missing in my life for too long. One of the most pivotal moments came in June 2022. I was invited to speak at a marketing conference in Chicago. It was a major event, attended by industry leaders, influencers, and colleagues from across the country. Standing on that stage, delivering a presentation that I'd poured months of preparation into, I felt a sense of exhilaration I hadn't known since my 20s. I saw people nodding, taking notes, asking questions afterward, and in that moment, I realized I was no longer living in her shadow. I was my own person, capable and visible. And then, as life would have it, I ran into her. It wasn't planned. She was there with Tyler, standing near the refreshments, chatting animatedly with a group of people. My heart skipped a beat, not out of longing, but out of the recognition of how far I'd come. She looked the same, confident, polished, but there was something different in the energy between us. I realized I no longer cared what she thought of me. The power had shifted. She noticed me too. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, there was a flicker of surprise in her gaze, maybe even a hint of recognition that I had changed. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't smile back. I just nodded and moved on, speaking to the people who mattered to me, the people who were part of my life now. That moment crystallized something I hadn't fully admitted to myself. I had become better than the version of me she had left behind. Not because I wanted to prove her wrong, but because I had refused to stay broken. Over the next few months, I started dating again, not recklessly, but intentionally. I met someone named Claire, a documentary filmmaker in her early 30s. She was smart, funny, and independent, with her own ambitions and passions. Being with her felt different. There was no pretense, no performance, no constant need for validation. It was natural, effortless. And the contrast with Lauren was stark. Where my marriage had been tense, guarded, and transactional, this connection was open, honest, and nourishing. I remember one evening in October 2022, sitting on my balcony with Claire, looking out over the city skyline, and realizing something profound. I felt lighter than I had in years. My chest, once tight with grief and anger, was open. I could breathe deeply again. I could laugh freely. I could imagine a future that didn't involve constantly trying to please someone else or being haunted by the betrayal of the past. During that period, I also began to take steps that I'd never considered before. I started investing in my own business ideas, small side projects I had shelved during my marriage. One of them, a local tech marketing consultancy, began to gain traction. I was meeting with clients, pitching strategies, and seeing tangible results. My confidence soared, and with it, a sense of independence I hadn't experienced in over a decade. And then came the subtle, almost accidental reminders of Lauren. Mutual friends would mention her casually, her new exhibitions, her travels, her life with Tyler. At first, I felt a twinge of jealousy, a flash of old pain. But those feelings grew weaker with each passing month. They were like shadows of old ghosts, visible but harmless. I had outgrown them. The turning point in my moral and emotional journey came unexpectedly, in December 2022. I received an email from a colleague who had stumbled upon some financial troubles involving Tyler. Nothing illegal, just reckless spending and instability that could have real consequences. At first, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it. After all, why should I care about her new life? But then another thought hit me. This was an opportunity, not to hurt her, not to gloat, but to finally release the last tether of anger I carried. I realized that any energy spent on resentment or revenge only anchored me to the past. True closure wouldn't come from confrontation. It would come from living fully, unapologetically, and letting the past exist without controlling me. I didn't contact her or Tyler. I didn't post anything online. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on my life, my business, my relationship with Claire, my friendships, my physical and emotional health. Every choice, every action was a step further away from the person I had been, a man broken by betrayal, and closer to the man I was becoming. By the start of 2023, the transformation was undeniable. I was thriving professionally, personally, and emotionally. I was dating Claire exclusively, and our relationship was deepening naturally. I traveled for work and pleasure, discovering corners of the world I had never experienced before. I learned new skills, pursued passions I'd shelved, and reconnected with parts of myself I had forgotten. And somewhere in the quiet moments, I realized something ironic. Lauren's prediction had been partially true. I hadn't found better in the way she intended, but I had found better in every way that mattered. Not a woman, not a relationship, but a life. A life full of respect, love, growth, and authenticity. A life that belonged to me entirely. I started to notice the subtle ways this change affected the world around me. Friends commented on my demeanor, colleagues remarked on my confidence, and even casual acquaintances seemed drawn to my presence. I wasn't arrogant or boastful, but I carried a quiet assurance that came from surviving and thriving. It was magnetic in a way I hadn't realized before. And then, one afternoon in March 2023, the world offered a final, unmistakable moment of poetic justice. I was walking into a cafe downtown when I saw her. Lauren, carrying a coffee cup, looking rushed and harried. Tyler was nowhere in sight. For a brief second, our eyes met. There was recognition, maybe even a flicker of apprehension. And then, she looked away. I didn't chase her. I didn't speak. I just smiled slightly, a small, private smile that no one else could see. It wasn't smugness, it was contentment. I realized that she had no power over me anymore. She couldn't hurt me, manipulate me, or dictate my sense of self-worth. I had reclaimed it all. Over the next few weeks, I reflected on the journey I'd undergone. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the long months of grief, it had all been necessary. It had forged a version of me that was resilient, self-aware, and unshakably grounded. I had turned the tables not by harming her or seeking revenge, but by becoming the best version of myself, a life that she couldn't touch, no matter how much she tried to impress or intimidate. By summer 2023, I realized the full scope of the transformation. I had a thriving business, a loving relationship, a strong social circle, and, most importantly, a sense of inner peace that had eluded me for years. I could look at her past actions without bitterness, without longing, without regret. And I understood something profound. Happiness isn't about proving someone wrong, it's about proving yourself right. Every choice I made now was intentional. I no longer feared loneliness, failure, or disappointment. I embraced them as part of life, knowing I had the strength and resilience to navigate them. And somewhere in that embrace, I found freedom, the kind of freedom that comes from surviving, learning, and choosing yourself above all else. The irony, the cruel but beautiful twist, was that Lauren's words, "You'll never find better," had motivated me in ways she could never have anticipated. They had sparked a fire, a determination to become someone who didn't rely on anyone else for validation. Someone who could smile at the world and at herself, fully independent and unafraid. And in that quiet, unassuming victory, I realized something even deeper. The tables had turned not because I outsmarted her, not because I sought revenge, but because I had chosen life. Life in its fullest, richest, most authentic form. A life that she could never take from me again. By the time autumn 2023 arrived, I had settled into a rhythm of life that felt entirely mine. The townhouse smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, the walls adorned with photos of places I had traveled, art I had collected, and memories I had chosen for myself. There were no reminders of Lauren anymore, no lingering perfume, no misplaced coffee mugs, no half-forgotten notes. Every corner was curated to reflect the person I had become, strong, self-reliant, and unapologetically present. Claire had become an integral part of my life. Our relationship wasn't defined by obsession or insecurity. It was built on respect, laughter, and mutual encouragement. We'd spent weekends exploring art galleries in New York, cycling along the waterfront in San Francisco, and hiking through the autumn-kissed forests near Asheville. Being with her felt natural, effortless, and nurturing in a way that had been absent in my marriage. I realized, sometimes painfully, that what I had thought was love with Lauren had mostly been habit, obligation, and manipulation. Professionally, I was thriving. My consultancy had expanded faster than I'd anticipated. Clients trusted me, partnerships were forming, and I had a growing reputation in the industry. Each success, no matter how small, reminded me that I was capable of achieving greatness on my own terms. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else, it was about proving to myself that I was enough. And yet, the most significant transformation was internal. I no longer carried the weight of resentment, the sharp sting of betrayal, or the fear that I'd never recover. I had faced those emotions head-on, sitting with them in their raw, uncomfortable forms, and emerged on the other side. I realized that closure wasn't something someone else could give me, it was something I had to take. And in taking it, I had reclaimed not just my life, but my sense of self. One evening in October 2023, I found myself walking past the same apartment complex where I had first caught Lauren with Tyler. The building was largely the same, though the landscaping had changed slightly, and the paint had faded in places. I stopped for a moment, thinking about the night I had watched them, my chest tightening with rage and heartbreak. But now, instead of anger, I felt nothing. A strange sense of calm settled over me. The memory was no longer a wound, it was a lesson, a marker of how far I had come. I remembered the way she had said, "You'll never find better than me." At the time, it had felt like a threat, a weapon designed to keep me tethered to the past. But looking back, I realized it had been a challenge I had unknowingly accepted. And in meeting it, I had transformed my life in ways she could never have anticipated. The better she had dismissed me as incapable of finding wasn't a person. It was the life I built, the freedom I claimed, the happiness I nurtured. And it was infinitely more satisfying than anything she could have offered me. A few weeks later, I received a message on LinkedIn from a mutual acquaintance. It was brief, casual, and almost hesitant. I saw Lauren's latest posts. "Looks like things haven't gone exactly as planned. Just thought you might want to know." At first, I felt the old twinge of curiosity, the flicker of a habit I thought I had left behind. But then I realized it didn't matter. I didn't need to know, to witness, or to gloat. Her life, her choices, were no longer my concern. I had built my happiness independent of her, and that independence was unshakable. I deleted the message, not out of spite, but out of liberation. Claire and I celebrated the first anniversary of our relationship in early November 2023. We went on a weekend trip to Napa Valley, staying at a small bed and breakfast nestled among the vineyards. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of fermenting grapes and autumn leaves. Sitting across from her at a small wooden table, glass of wine in hand, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the love I had, the life I had built, and the resilience I had discovered in myself. It was during that trip that I fully understood the magnitude of my journey. The pain, the heartbreak, the betrayal, they had all been catalysts. They had forced me to confront who I was, what I wanted, and what I deserved. Without them, I might still be the same man I was a year ago, insecure, dependent, and defined by someone else's approval. But now I was whole, complete, free. By December 2023, I had begun sharing parts of my story with close friends and even professional circles, not for pity or attention, but as a testament to resilience. People would listen, nod, and sometimes share their own experiences. It was therapeutic to realize that my journey, while intensely personal, resonated with others. Pain shared becomes less isolating, and in sharing mine, I found connection, empathy, and purpose. One quiet evening, I found myself scrolling through social media, as one does out of habit. I paused on Lauren's profile, not out of longing, but curiosity. Her posts were polished, curated snapshots of her life with Tyler. At first glance, everything seemed perfect. But I noticed the subtle cracks, comments hinting at tension, captions that felt performative rather than genuine. I didn't laugh, I didn't feel triumph, I just observed. And in that observation, I realized the ultimate truth. Her life, her happiness, her choices, none of it affected me. None of it ever had. I thought back to the moment she left, to the nights of sleepless grief, to the despair and anger that had consumed me. And I understood something vital. The power she once held over me had never been hers. It had always been mine to release. And by reclaiming it, I had not only survived, I had flourished. In the months that followed, I continued to build. My consultancy grew, my relationships deepened, and I found joy in the everyday routines I had once taken for granted. I learned to savor solitude, to embrace challenges, and to find meaning in small victories. The man I had been, a man defined by betrayal, doubt, and fear, was gone. In his place stood someone resilient, self-aware, and fully alive. There were moments, of course, when the past whispered to me. A song on the radio, a fleeting memory of a shared joke, a scent that reminded me of old mornings. But instead of pulling me back, these moments served as reminders of how far I had come. They were markers of growth, not anchors of pain. By early 2024, I could finally articulate the lesson I had learned. Happiness is not about revenge, closure, or proving someone wrong. It is about reclaiming your own life, nurturing your own growth, and choosing yourself above all else. Everything else, betrayal, heartbreak, loss, becomes context, a backdrop against which your strength is revealed. I occasionally think about Lauren, about the words she said and the life she chose. Sometimes I wonder if she ever realizes the depth of the impact her actions had, not in breaking me, but in forcing me to transform. I don't wish her harm, nor do I feel the urge to gloat. Instead, I wish she could understand what I have come to realize on my own, that true power lies in self-reclamation, not manipulation or control. The final, quiet victory is this: I am no longer defined by her. I am not tethered to her choices or her life. I am free to love, to create, to explore, to grow, and to do so on my own terms. That freedom, that autonomy, that sense of wholeness, is something she cannot take from me, no matter what she says or does. One evening, sitting on my balcony as the sun set over the city, I felt a profound sense of peace. Claire was inside, laughing at something on the TV, the dog curled up at her feet. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of early winter. I took a deep breath and realized, in a way that I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years, that I was happy. Truly, deeply happy. And in that moment, I finally understood what it meant to be free from the past. It wasn't about forgetting the pain, the betrayal, or the heartbreak. It was about transforming that pain into strength, that heartbreak into clarity, and that betrayal into the catalyst for the life I had always deserved. I smiled, quietly, to myself, because for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that Lauren's words had failed. I had found better, not in her, not in revenge, not in validation, but in myself. And that was a victory so complete, so profound, that it would carry me through the rest of my life. I was no longer the man she left behind. I was someone stronger, happier, and infinitely more alive. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just survive. I thrived.